So what I'd like to talk about tonight is really about this idea of a Hong Kong Biodiversity Museum, how it came together, how we are making it grow at the moment, and what we hope to achieve in the future. So I hope that will be interesting for all of you. So first, let me start here with the importance of natural historic collection. Sorry, I have somebody in the chat. Let me see. Okay. What is the importance of natural historic collection? Well, there are actually several purposes that are being served by this type of collection. And one that is very core to our mission here of the HKBM is to educate the public on the richness and importance of biodiversity. We can all go to nature, and I always encourage people to do that. But unfortunately, when you go to nature, you don't have the chance to see everything. Well, in museums, you can really see things, sometimes things that you might have seen in books, but you have never seen before in real life. You can also compare things. So there's really a real value to actually observing specimen directly. Let me see. Sorry, I just tried to. Okay. The second aspect is really what is known as biobank. So a biobank is a preservation of specimen collection. This is extremely important, and I would say this is probably one of the aspects of museum that is becoming more and more important as technology is being developed. For instance, something that was impossible just 15 or 20 years ago, such as extracting DNA from a specimen that may have been preserved for 50 or 100 years, is actually something that now we can do. So as you can imagine, we can actually extract a lot of information from those specimens when they are being preserved. Of course, once we have specimens record, we also know most of the time where and when they were collected. And so that can really inform us a lot about the distribution of the species and potentially how they may have gone extinct, or help us to do research on why the species may have gone extinct for particular areas. Now, why keeping specimen collection? Well, there's many fields of biology that actually, or research, that will benefit from it. One of the main one is taxonomy, and myself doing taxonomy working on ants, I can tell you this is one that is extremely valuable. So comparison hundreds of thousands of specimens is absolutely key, and museum and visits of museums are determinant for that. As I was mentioning earlier, now we have the samples that we are extracting. For which we can extract DNA, knowing about the distribution of species, and then later potentially inform about conservation actions. We can also take a lot of measurement on those specimens. So for example, if we want to observe long trends about size change, this is something that is very key if you have a specimen or a series of specimens, because you can understand how the evolution or adaptation of particular species might occur over time and space. And without specimen, unfortunately, this is not the kind of work that you can do. And specimen comparison obviously can help you to resolve some of the problem you may have. I think recently there was a species of snake in Hong Kong that were determined as new. Part of this work actually included having access to all specimens. And of course, what's very important is for education and public outreach, and there's many different ways to do that. But often, especially for the young public, but I would say also for the more adult or senior people, it's a great way to observe biodiversity and realize how diverse it is. I could tell you that myself, I've been working on insects for over 20 years now, but that's, and I've read and learned a lot about insects in different parts of the world, in different microhabitat, for example, in a canopy. But that's really when I actually have visited a museum in Tokyo, and I realized that you had this beautiful wall full of insects that were collected on a single tree in Hong Kong. That I realized the diversity and abundance of insects that could be found. So sometimes to visualize things, it can be extremely important. Oh, and for the media as well, this is also a good way to promote, because that's of course something very much visible, and they like to take pictures and do that. And in Hong Kong in particular, they are very fond of coming to the museum. Now, let me talk about the origins of the museum here, how the collection was established. So I'm actually not the one who established the collection. It was already one that was present when I joined HKU in 2014. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have any archives about the collection. And so we are not really able to tell you specifically who or when it was started. We can only emit some hypotheses, and one of the ones that we think is HKU being a teaching institution. It was probably developed for teaching. One of the other reasons why we think this was the case is because many specimens have relatively limited information. So they will not be really useful for research. Unfortunately, some of our specimens do not necessarily have the date of their collection, or sometimes they don't have the location where they were collected. So this is not really the kind of practice that you will have if you intended to collect those for research, but probably more so if it was only for teaching. Not that I recommend doing that anyway, but just so you know. And over time, the collection has been scattered and unattended. So that's really a problem because the specimens were in not just in the room that I am now, but in many other places on campus. And so just to illustrate that, we had some of the specimens that were just posted outside of the elevator at different floors. So clearly this was lacking some protection, and also there is nobody really taking care of them. And others were simply stored within cabinets that were actually underlocked. And so for 20 years at least, some of them had completely disappeared from even the professional staff that didn't know where they were, until almost by coincidence, I found them one day. And as you can see, they were just all piled up without a clear notion of protection of the specimen. So when I joined HKU in 2014, then as an assistant professor, one of the technicians led me to that room. And myself, as I had worked in different museums, I found it very interesting. And my first question was to ask, who is the curator or the director of this museum? The response I got was, what's that? So clearly, I realized that nobody was taking care of that collection. And after further discussion I had with different people, it was clearly the case. And I see that there was an opportunity to do something with such collection. So I just volunteered to become the director or informal director back then. And it was pretty much myself. So I was directing myself to basically try to do some kind of project with this collection. One of the first thing I realized is that the collection was actually need to be developed. And to do so, I had to actually increase the storage capacity. So I was able to get a bit of funding to buy a few cabinets, and in particular, increase the arthropod capacity, because those are the ones that you can store easily especially when you have a limited amount of spaces, but also get some of the specimens. And so some of the research projects that were done in my lab, as well as other labs, were actually used to directly complete and enhance the collection. Some were also gathered. So this is one of the key pieces. It's actually a gibbon you can see here that was locked under a lock in a cabinet for 20 years. And so this is about the time where I found it, and I was pretty much face to face when I opened the cabinet. So you can see my surprise when I saw that. So trying to have all those pieces that were put all together into a single room was then quite important. And then progressively, I started the first private visits. HKU has started hearing about my initiative here. And so they were asking me if I could have some groups of students, for example, visiting, which I was happy to do. And every time I was organizing visits, I could really witness the excitement of both children and adults. And that's why I realized that actually Hong Kong does not have much capacity in terms of presenting a specimen like this. And so it was really exciting for a lot of people to come here and witness them. But I have to wait before to go further, because back then I was not tenure. So I know some of you are in academia, so you realize the kind of pressure you may have. And clearly building a museum and doing knowledge exchange would not help my career at that stage. So I started working on the museum, but I would say I did not invest too much work on it. First, I need to focus on research, which is basically what could give me potentially my tenure, and then the more freedom to work on the museum. So in September 2019, I applied for tenure. And in 2019, I actually submitted the first grant to develop the museum, which was submitted to ECF. Unfortunately for me, I got both. And that's really, I would say, a marking point when the Hong Kong Biodiversity Museum really could become alive then. But we had a huge amount of work ahead, and we still have a huge amount of work. But here I just illustrate this with some of the specimens. So basically, you can see like different specimens that were donated. So on the top left, for example, you can see specimens of herbs that were given by the laboratory of Professor Dejan, some wasp, but there is also a lot of reorganization of plenty of specimens. And first of all, we had to know what was in the collection. And so since November 2020, we actually start cataloging and databasing all the specimens. And in particular, this is the work that Aline, who comes from Brazil, is doing. And she's doing a fantastic job at this. And it consists of many different things. Of course, knowing all the specimens that are present, we are checking the species name and their identification, and we are databasing everything here. We are fixing the specimen when they are broken, or sometimes when we have leakage for those who are preserved in liquids. We are adding new specimens to the collection, which is also very important to keep the museum well alive. And all those steps ultimately will be essential for both our educational and research purpose. Now, when we try to update the taxonomy, it's actually quite challenging. And to date, we only have been able to do it for numbers of which include bees, birds, corals, crabs, fishes, mammals, mollusks, reptiles, and social wasps. And we really ask different experts to come and help us in that task. And I'd like to thank them here. So it's really a slow process here, and it's unfortunately not possible for all specimens, because sometimes we have a lack of collection information. So to give you an example with fishes, for example, I had Professor Ivan Sadovi working on them, and she did a terrific job. But here, one of the issues is that sometimes she could not have access to the locality where some of the specimens were collected. So it's very hard to know what a species is if you don't have any information about where they were collected. So it's really an ongoing process, and I think it's probably going to keep us busy for many years. But altogether, at this point, we have about 15,000 specimens in database. So one by one, we had to go through. And we basically collected all the information available about their geography, the date, or the collection method when those were available. But then we also had new information. So the taxonomy, so what kind of species or genus, family, order is it? The IUCN status, if we have species that are basically threatened to some extent. And then we measure all the specimen. This is also very important because this helps us to know the quality of the specimen, but also to arrange the collection later on. As you can see, we have a majority of insects in our collection, about 12,000 specimens, and that makes sense. And I would say it's probably the case in most museums around the world, simply because insects are the most abundant and diverse group. But then we also have a pretty good collection of vertebrate. As you can see, we have, I think we're getting close to 300 mammals now, so it's not completely up to date. Over 200 reptiles, 430 amphibians, nearly 200 birds, and almost 350 fishes. And then we have a numbers of other invertebrates, both terrestrial and marine. On top of that, we also have an estimate of about 5,000 animal specimens, which are mainly fish and insects, that we are in a process of adding to the database. And this year, we just recently got about 6,000 plant specimens, which we hope to complete by the end of this year or maybe next year. So in total, at this point, I think we have about 26,000 specimens, which honestly, for a museum is a relatively modest size, but nonetheless, we can see that the collection is increasing, mainly through the donation from different people, as well as some research project. So one of the aspects that is very important is the historical importance of the collection. And I would say for the collection that we have here already, we have a number of specimens that are almost 100 years old. And we have, I would say, what is a time machine here that we can use. So that's really providing us a temporal window to biodiversity. And that's, to me, one of the key point of keeping collections of specimens, because that's something that once you have the specimens, especially some that are 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 years old, extremely important to preserve those and to pass them to the next generation of people who visit, but also those who might be interested in doing research. And so at this point, we have over 1,300 specimens that are over 40 years old. I take this threshold because I'm myself, well, I'm a bit more than 40 years old, but that gives you an idea. So I guess if it's above that, I consider maybe it's old. But joke aside, I think it's a very good state for a collection to have a baseline for which we know what is the historical value of it. Now, we also fix broken specimens. So here you can see some of the skeletons, for example. We had a program where people help us and donated some of the funding that we used to actually fix some of the specimens. And by doing so, we actually realized that some of the bones that we have were quite important. So for example, okay, started again. And so one of the things that we took advantage of during that COVID break that was imposed to us is actually to really change completely the collection disposition. So when you will come here, we have a better story about the evolution of life that we can provide to the public. So if you already visited, I invite you to come again whenever we are open to witness that new experience. And so then in about 10 months ago now, we opened the museum. So that was on May 22nd, 2021. And honestly, I had no idea what to expect with the audience, if the people would be interested. But I know that the goal that we had was to provide high quality education to the public about local and global biodiversity. This was, and it remains our main goal here at the museum. And to do so, I had the chance to have Louisa, who was our first education manager, who did an absolutely fantastic job. And since September, we have Anders now, who replaced Louisa, and who also is doing a fantastic job. So I'm very fortunate to have great elements in the team, and I want to thank them tonight. And then we also had, I would say, some kind of an incubator for interns and volunteers. So we had many people who actually come and help, and really it's a tremendous help for the kind of work that we do, and we need that. So if some of you are later interested to be involved with the museum, do not hesitate to contact us. So when I applied to the grant to ECF, we had a goal of receiving 4,000 visitors per year. And again, I had no idea if we will reach that goal. But very quickly, we realized actually the museum was fully booked. And actually, since the very beginning, it got fully booked in almost no time. We had a very high demand from the public, a lot of frustration too from the people because they cannot come. But altogether, we have welcomed over 7,000 visitors since the opening. And I would say like now we are close since early January, so for about 7 months time. And we have very limited budget, or actually we have no budget for advertisement. So we only use social media for that. And it worked beautifully, I have to say. And the reason why we cannot receive more people is because we have both space and staff limitation to have more visitors. So we hope that in the future, which is what I will present later, we will be able to do better for that. But what's important for us is also the feedback that we get from our visitors. And here I just want to introduce some of the questions we asked the people after they visited. And most of those questions are about their experience with the museum, the guidelines, for example. And if it's 4 or 5, it's very positive. 5 being like they are very happy, very good. So the interpretation from the guides were clear and professional. The duration of the visit was sufficient is actually one of the ones where we have the lowest score. And it's because a lot of people are actually asking for longer visit. Right now, when you visit, it's a 45-minute period. Because we are quite limited again in space and staff. So to get, I would say, enough turnover of people to be able to come, we have to keep it relatively short. But many people ask us to have 1 hour or even more. Of course, something that is very important for us is how people are learning about biodiversity. So to that extent, nearly 90% of people think that they have learned more about biodiversity, which is good, but I think we should not feel satisfied here. I think it should get higher, and that's what we are working on. And finally, what is very encouraging is that the vast majority of people wants to visit again, and even more so wants to recommend it to either the friends or the family. So I think this is really encouraging for this kind of institution in Hong Kong. So I think we have a 5-star museum here, at least that we can introduce. Now, our education goal, in particular for a museum that is so small physically, has to be expanded over online support. And so for that, we develop an internet interface to introduce the museum, its collection, with regular updates featuring the major species on display and providing useful education material on biodiversity. And again, we had set a goal initially of 5,000 online visitors. And we developed a website here. And so far, we had over 45,000 unique visitors and over 150,000 views. So I think we did fulfill that goal. We're quite pleased about it. But of course, social media are extremely important. And so in March 2021, so now a year ago, we developed our interface. And we are present on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So if you're not following us yet, please do so and join a community of nearly 7,000 followers at this point. So I think this is very pleasant to see that so many people are keen to learn and follow the work that we do. And so if you get a chance, you can take your phone and take a QR code here. So you can learn about diversity. Twice a week, a new post. And all of those are original posts that we produce. And I just realized today that we had produced 104 original posts. And I would say on average, we have almost 2,000 people that are being reached. I don't know if all of them are reading them, but at least we can reach a certain number of people. And in total, it's over 2,000 people on Facebook alone that were reached this way. So I think it's quite encouraging. Oh, sorry, I realized I forgot to update the numbers under the figure here. One thing that is very important also for us is really to talk about local biodiversity. So now 85% of our posts will be talking about local biodiversity. So people can really, again, transfer from what they are learning to their observation in the field. And we really present a very wide range of species and taxa. So everybody will basically learn something new, hopefully. And so we cover a very wide range of interest here. Now, if we talk about the future, I think what we have been able to show is that there is a very strong interest for this kind of museum here in Hong Kong, and it's time for the HKBM to deploy its wings. So for the future development, what I hope to achieve, of course, is to welcome more visitors, display more specimens. Some are not displayed in the museum by lack of space, but also develop new activities and really play a major role in cataloging the local and regional biodiversity, because there's still so much to be done in that sense. And so that comes through different angles, which I call the window, the vault, and the bridge. And I want to introduce to you each of them. So the window is really for the visitors, a way for the people to actually look at the natural world through a new angle, something that may not have seen in their entire life. So to me, it's very important, and especially that I work with insects, which are small creatures, but also represent an incredible diversity. I really want people to be able to see them the same way that I see them as a researcher. So using microscope, using some technology, so they can be very surprised and recognize there is a sense of beauty or diversity here being present. And so develop a new gallery and multiple exhibitions centered around various themes will be really one of the key points here to do that. And so one of the example would be to present new aspects. So here we hope in the future to develop the seeds of Hong Kong, basically by presenting the diversity of color, shapes, texture, and also ecological strategy being developed by seeds. So here you can see all those seeds. They are just 2 or 3 millimeter long, but look at that diversity again that we can observe here. So really getting a chance people to realize that what they might see every day is much more impressive than what they knew so far. It's also important to engage the public in activities. And I think a museum, for example, could be really a central place to develop citizen science program, really a way to have hands-on activities for the public. We actually tried that this year. I had an undergraduate student, Camille, that was developing a final year project. And we just made a test with ants, which is called Sentinel. And basically, we have been very surprised by the amount of people that wanted to participate, actually so much that we had to stop the program and say, sorry, we are full, we cannot follow. And it was really great. People were making taking their own picture and advertising to their friends. And we really get this kind of interest from a lot of children, but also the parents, so they can learn and make some observation. I think it's a really great way to engage people with nature. And one of the things that is important is to also bring different actors and field together. So in particular, I think nature is absolutely fascinating if you're a biologist, but even if you have other interests. Being an artist, for example, is such a source of inspiration. So you get access to a different vision of the world, you might find it very inspiring. So here are just some pictures that we take with a powerful microscope that we have in my research laboratory. And those really are telling us something very different about the world surrounding us, and something that we may learn to appreciate. I really like this last one. To me, it almost looks like a firework in the wings of a butterfly. And this one is actually the abdomen of a moth. And most people might just think it's some kind of a tapestry or something interesting like this. So really bringing, again, this different angle and inspiring people. I think nature from all time has given that to humanity, and living in big urban environment, we might have been disconnected of that. I think a museum can really help bridging that. There's a lot of art museum in Hong Kong. I think now we need one that is doing biology and art all together. The vault is really the biobank, and a biobank to preserve Hong Kong natural heritage, to pass it to future generations. It's quite amazing to me that Hong Kong has so many banks with so much wealth, and there is no biobank. There is nothing to actually preserve that heritage. And I think it would be great if this kind of heritage could really be passed on with a big structure in Hong Kong, just like you have in other large cities, either in Beijing or Tokyo or Washington or Paris or London, etc., or Singapore. But we don't have that in Hong Kong. This is really something missing. So depositing historical collection and making sure we can preserve them properly for decades and centuries to come. It also helps at describing new species. And so I'll just take a few examples of the new ant species we described. And currently, when I describe new species from Hong Kong, I actually need to send the holotype specimen, so the specimen on which the description of the species is based on, to overseas museum. And I think it's a pity, because why not preserving this diversity right here? This fern here on the left, which was collected in 1889, is actually a fern that belongs to my father. He's a botanist, and he's not that old, but when he was a young student, he had the chance to receive about 1,000 plates of preserved plants, and some of them are actually from Hong Kong. And I would love one day to tell him, Dad, I'd love for those plates to be hosted in Hong Kong, but I will only do that once I will know that there is actually a museum able to do so in the best condition.
Sorry, Benoit, can I interrupt?
Yes.
There's a question from Steve. He asked the collection that you described, exhibits found in Hong Kong, the previous slide. So are you reaching out to the territories, other university and institution to see they have their own underused collection that could be combined? So your last slide.
With other collection?
Yes. Can you combine with other university or institution? Have you tried?
Yes,
No.
I think this absolutely. I think this is really important. There are other collections in Hong Kong. We're not the only one. Far from that. And actually, I've seen people from KFBG there, and we already have some collaboration, and we had discussion. They have fantastic collection over there. I think it would be really helpful if the resources could actually be put together with a common endeavor. This is my point of view. I don't know if it's shared by everyone necessarily, but I think it's really important. Yeah, so can really develop more activities for research, for education, and so on.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Then there's this last part, which I call the bridge, which is much more about research, but research in the best sense of the term, where it's really about knowledge exchange between experts, but also between experts and amateurs. There are a lot of people in Hong Kong who are extremely knowledgeable, which are not necessarily in academia, we just do that as a hobby, but they do absolutely fantastic work. But sometimes they are, or they feel themselves limited to access to a place to host their collection, or to a microscope, or to maybe knowledge so they can publish in a certain way. And I think a museum will really be a fantastic place to create this kind of place of exchange between individuals, but also for training the next generation of these people who may become the next CEO Wilson of Hong Kong, or maybe those who just want to do a hobby and become extremely good at it. So I think it's really important to have this kind of access to all kinds of individuals interested in just learning new skills or helping about cataloging biodiversity. So that's really how we enhance scientific research to fill knowledge gap about biodiversity in Hong Kong, but also much more broadly in Asia. I think it's really key to have this kind of institution. So now you might ask, okay, but where can we really do that? Where to do new museums? Well, this is the HKU campus here on the picture. And if some of you had visited, there's this little building here, which actually is not so little, which currently belongs by the Water Service Department, which is perfectly located because it's easily accessed through MTR, but there's some road as well. There's plenty of bus. So it's really a place that many people can access to. There's also access already in place for people with mobility. So this is really great. And the area is actually not too bad, 545 square meter. For comparison, the space that we have now is 62 square meters. So you can see it's almost 8 times larger. And it's also an heritage building, which was built in 1932, but is abandoned for almost 30 years now. So I think it would be a really great opportunity to basically preserve the cultural heritage of Hong Kong with the biological heritage. And this way, as I was mentioning earlier, putting multiple fields together, not just about biology, but also considering other aspects of architecture, arts, etc. There's only just a limitation, is that I need to raise $90 million, which I do not have on my bank account. I checked this morning. So I guess I will need to find people who are interested in this project or in other kind of project eventually, if they are keen to. So I hope by this point you may ask yourself, how can you help? Well, very simply, we accept a financial support. Small or large amount are very welcome. We have a fundraising campaign we use for helping restoration of bones and specimens, but also for helping future educational activities. So you can contribute to it directly through visiting our website. You can, of course, as I mentioned earlier, become part of our volunteers team. You can follow us on social media and promote the HKBM to your friends and family. And if you have specimen that you would like to donate, or who knows, maybe a building that you would like to donate, we are actually very keen to engage with you. Now, one of the questions that often people ask me about specimens, I want to make it clear that we are not encouraging people to go and collect new specimens. But instead, for example, we receive a number of turtle shell or actually full turtle that people had for many decades in their home because maybe 50, 60 years ago, it looks like it was fashionable to have that at home. And so there is some trade going on. And now people have this kind of inconvenient heritage that they might receive from their grandparents, for example. And so they are looking for a place where they could give them and help with education. So we are getting those. And of course, when we are getting any specimens, we never pay, so that we do not promote any kind of trade with it. And we also are very careful of the origin of the specimen. So I just want to thanks again the fantastic that we have. So Aline and Anders, we are doing a fantastic job to the day-to-day operation. The great team of interns and volunteers, I really miss them for the past 3 months. We didn't see them much, unfortunately, because of the COVID. And I also want to thank specifically Professor Ivan Sadovi, Dr. Billy Howe, and Mr. Christophe Barthélemy, who have been part of this project since the early days. So with all of them, that's really a great team that we have the chance to have. I want to thank also the funding, so ECF, which represent 80% of my funding, and I'm actually for transparency, so you can see all of funds, the University of Hong Kong, obviously, and not just the funding, but the space being provided. And finally, and they help not just in terms of the money, but psychologically, it's good to see that people appreciate, because one thing I didn't mention is that the museum is free of charge when you visit. And I really want to keep it this way. So if people want to make a little contribution in terms of appreciation, it's very welcome. So thank you for your attention. And I'm going to stop my screen here so you can see a bit more the collection now.
Anybody have a question for Benoit? I think Wendy has a question. Does the biodiversity offer virtual tours to school?
So yes, we do open to school. We make a special arrangement for tours. Usually the tours are a bit longer. We try to make them 1 hour long if we can. Yeah.
So I actually have 2 questions, but if you don't mind.
No.
So once is because you gave us an overview of the different challenges and the different project opportunities that you're trying to raise to improve the museum. But right now, if you had to define one main challenge or the first next step for the museum to grow, what it will be?
More staff, because that takes a lot of time to prepare everything. Like for example, I was mentioning just writing the post on the social media, for example. That's really taking a lot of time. But just having at least one more full-time staff, I think would be a huge help. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and my second question was more about when you introduced the collections, and you said that it was for the purpose of teaching, but not of research.
Yes.
Could it be possible that it was not in any purpose, but just, like you said, they received from donation? Because I know, for example, in France, it happened a lot in the old collections. The museum receive a lot of collection that they don't even ask people to donate it for free, and then they don't know from where or what is the date of and the occurrence where they found the specimens. So I guess maybe the museum accumulate a lot of collections for free, and then it was not because they don't want to do research, but not because they couldn't properly do it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a possibility, although there is a very long tradition of having a zoology department and as well a botanical department. And so back in the days, basically people or students did not have access to internet or this kind of digital media that we have now. And the best way to learn was actually to observe and draw the specimens yourself. So often different departments were keeping their own collection for that purpose. And it really seemed that those specimens here were used like this and when I talk with colleagues who are a bit more senior than me, they actually confirmed this kind of purpose of the specimen back then, even 20, 25 years ago. And then, as I mentioned, some of them disappeared for some time because the department has changed building, and some of the specimens were put in a closet or in a cabinet, and nobody knew where they were. And so they were really lacking at that point because they were wondering where is that specimen, or where is this or that. Yeah. So
yeah, that's what happened also because I come from a background of paleontology, and sometimes when you want to find the specimen from a previous research 20, 40 years ago, the specimen just disappeared because the museum change of location and so on. So.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think Gary has a question. Gary, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, everyone. It's not so much a question, but it's just to kind of congratulate Benoit for actually getting this off the ground and running, because I think we talked a long time about it. And I myself remember in the 1990s opening cupboards and finding some of the animals which you've actually taken out of the cupboards, and now other people can see them. I also want to emphasize one of the points you made about the importance of these collections, because when I saw how the animals and that were being kept at Hong Kong U, and it was basically in just storerooms, and then I started working at Kadoorie Farm, I realized that at some point, even if you're not doing some kind of study on these animals, someone else might need to in the future. And so that's how our collection at Kadoorie Farm started. It was really just to preserve, first of all, some of the things that I'd accumulated during my PhD at Hong Kong U. And then from that point onwards, we had a specimen room which just collected, but we never had a curator. So obviously when you came along, is to get a sort of professional collection going, where other people could visit, and the important thing is you're curating it. You've got a story there as well. Our collection was open to visiting scientists, and so it wasn't being totally wasted. But I think what you're doing and educating kids and that is really very, it's great. And yeah, we will keep helping you if we can.
Thank you very much, Gary. That's very nice to hear that. Yeah, I think it's really important, this collection part, and in particular the databasing, getting a database. So you're mentioning visiting scientists, but I think this works much better if you can tell them in advance, this is what you can find in the collection, this is where you can find it, this is the current stage or status of the specimens. And this is a part that really enhances research and biodiversity research, which I think we all need. You were mentioning back in the days in the 90s when you were doing your PhD, John Fellows, who was doing the ants, and which were hosted for a long time at KFBG. Which we get a few years back, and now we are revisiting that collection that he did 30 years ago, and actually describing new species from Hong Kong, from other part of China. I mean, you guys did a fantastic job back then about doing biodiversity surveys, and those specimens, that knowledge really come to life once you get access to it. But for that, you need to have the people who had the intelligence of preserving those specimens. And so I think there's a lot of students here. Keeping your specimens in your collection is not just for yourself, but it may be for somebody in 30, 50, 100 years from now on, and that could be extremely valuable.
Thank you, Benoit. I just put it in the chat room. I think we have 3 questions for you from the budget to working with the LCSD library. And the first question is about technology. How will technology play a role in your collection? So if you can see the chat room, I have summarized the question for you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for the first collection, we actually have worked with an architect to make the estimate, and we have a particular idea in mind, a way to develop it. So this is a rough estimate. I would say this is not to the dollar, but at least it gives us an idea of what's the direction to go. And this cost is principally for the building itself and the structure within the building. Yeah, it doesn't include much of the other costs for staff, for example. The second part is, in the US and Europe, libraries are becoming citizen science lab for the public engaged in. Is there any discussion between the HKBM and LSCD run public libraries to increase public engagement and knowledge sharing? No, this is a very good point. At this point, we do not have discussion, but this is something that would be really good. I think we may be a bit too small at this point to do this kind of activity, at least on the whole. Again, I mentioned the staff limitation. This is something that any kind of new activities will take a lot of time if we want to do it right. And so I think we need to increase a bit in terms of staffing to develop those activities. But that's a very interesting point, honestly. Yeah. Then the third question is about the creation of biodiversity collection and the technology. How does digital media play the role of collection creation and archiving? How will technologies such as 3D scanning or other form of media will play a role in the future of Biodiversity Museum? This is a very interesting question. It's definitely something that is very important. Of course, we are all familiar with imaging things, especially for insects, imaging them with a microscope or doing things like stacking imaging, which basically takes multiple pictures at different depth of field, and then basically the software will create a very nice picture. This can be done. Again, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of funding to have this access to this technology. 3D scanning is even more expensive. It takes a lot of time, especially macro CT. So this is something that can be done. But when we have a collection that is 15,000 specimens, we need to prioritize then on particular groups. So that's, I think, something that we would like to do more in the long term. If we have the opportunity for it, more opportunity that we create for it. But that's a very good point, yeah.
Thank you, Benoit. I think your colleague Anders have something to add on the virtual tour. So Anders, can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Hello, everyone. Just want to say regarding the question about the technology we have now, it's very fascinating and inspiring to use under microscope, because not everyone got a chance to use a very expensive microscope to see every details of small invertebrates. So it's a different angle to learn about biodiversity, including myself. Regarding the virtual tours, because of the pandemic, we are closed right now. So very unfortunate, but we start to do some virtual tours every Saturday. So we got both sessions of Cantonese and also English. And if your organization or schools have interested in doing a private tour, I'm happy to do that. So you can just email us through the Biodiversity Museum, the gmail.com. So we can schedule a time to do a virtual tour about an hour to just discuss about biodiversity or specific species about that as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot, Anders. I just want to add this here. This is a museum that we have, which actually projects on iPad or even on your cell phone if you have an iPhone and the right app installed. And so basically you can stream live about the specimens that are being observed. And so we do that for every single tour of the visitors, and that's a huge hit. I can tell you, people really enjoy that. Initially, this was a microscope I had bought for my lab for teaching students how to use particular techniques, but then I realized it was an absolutely fantastic tool to use just for everybody basically. And so looking at the wings of a butterfly magnified 40 times, for example, is absolutely stunning, and children or adults are absolutely amazed to learn about that and learn about wasps and ants and beetles and all the beautiful colors and patterns, and also to teach about natural history and the lifestyle of those different specimens and species. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? And I'm sure, Benoit, when do you expect your museum opening again after the restriction? It'll be late April, hopefully.
If I had this answer, I guess we are dependent of the. I was about to use other words, but dependent will be fine. Dependent of the decision of the government. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do encourage everybody to follow the Facebook of the Biodiversity Museum. They have some really good posts. I think all of them are bilingual, so about different animals and concepts. I personally learn a lot just from reading your posts, and even though you cannot visit the museum at this point, but just to learn about the various biology or anatomy of the species, or what are they called, or what are their special habitat, is very fascinating. So congrats to Benoit and your team for working very hard on that. I can definitely tell there's a lot of effort to put behind those posts to educate the public about the animals.
Thank you, Benita, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. Yes, those posts, we really have two main axes, I would say. One is really about focusing on one species. So every Friday, this is what we call the species showcase. And then we have other notes that relates to various aspects about biodiversity, but animal behavior, conservation, all kinds of aspects. So if you want to learn more and just spend 5 minutes reading them and enjoy, I think this is a great activity. Yeah.
Okay, so now it's 10:01, and don't want to take your evening too much longer. I thank everybody for coming, and again, please follow the museum page. Follow Lumi Foche with the talk. The CTU, Nicholas and his team seems to have a very good program tomorrow. Please try to follow local biodiversity news, and see you next time, everybody. Have a good evening.